What aspects did George RR Matin contribute to the lore of Elden Ring? What parallels do we find between the story of Elden Ring and his landmark series A Song of Ice and Fire? Which real-world myths did George draw on for inspiration for the creation of this lore? And can we learn anything from the mythos surrounding one of these amazing universes to inform us about the other? Hi, I'm Eldrick Stoneskin, and if you enjoy theories and analysis of A Song of Ice and Fire and its parallels with Elden Ring, make sure you hit the subscribe button below, as this will be the first in a series comparing the parallels we find between these two amazing universes. The game Elden Ring is the latest release from Japanese video game developers From Software, and plain and simply, one of the greatest video game experiences ever created. Developed by the brilliant mind of Hidetaka Miyazaki, the creator of the equally amazing Dark Souls series, who for this project in particular collaborated with George RR Matin to create its lore. And I think the creative input that George had towards the story of Elden Ring is best explained by Miyazaki himself, saying in an interview with Xbox Magazine that the actual collaboration itself begun with Mr. Martin ever so politely confirming what sorts of themes, ideas, as well as many game-related aspects I had envisioned for the game. This allowed us to have many free and creative conversations regarding the game, in which Mr. Martin later used as a base to write the overarching mythos for the game world itself. This mythos proved to be full of interesting characters and drama, along with a plethora of mystical and mysterious elements as well. It was a wonderful source of stimulus for me and the development staff. Elden Ring's world was constructed using this mythos and stimulus as a base. And what's interesting here is that it seems after some collaborative meetings with Miyazaki, George RR Matin wrote the history and lore of the Lands Between, including the characters and the drama surrounding them, with Miyazaki then creating the story surrounding the events of the game. And what's interesting is that when we look to the mythos and characters Hidetaka Miyazaki is describing here within Elden Ring, is that we find it shares an incredible amount of parallels with George RR Matin's series, A Song of Ice and Fire. Because as we're about to discuss, and consider this a spoiler warning for both Elden Ring and A Song of Ice and Fire, it seems both series contain magical world trees watered with blood, magical beings bound inside these trees given eternal life, Shadowbound Wolf companions for these magical beings, and much, much more. Now, I'm only going to give a broad overview of the story of Elden Ring due to its complexity, mainly pointing out the plot elements relevant for our comparison. If you'd like to know more about this amazing story, I've left some links in the description below to some of the incredible creators within the Elden Ring community, such as Vardy Vidya, the Tarnished Archaeologist, Zuli the Witch, Smowtown, Miss Chalice, and Square Table Gaming, just to name a few. Now, our story begins with an outer god known as the Greater Will, sending a golden star down from the cosmos to a place known as the Lands Between, a star which was harbouring an Elden beast, a beast which eventually became the Elden Ring. Now, the Elden Ring itself isn't a physical ring. It's more of a metaphysical object made up of a series of powerful runes, with these runes of power dictating the laws of reality within the Lands Between, creating an order for the world to follow, set by the Greater Will. And it seems as though the Elden Ring housed itself within an existing tree known as the Great Tree, causing this giant tree to glow with the Elden Ring's golden radiance and shine its blessings on the inhabitants below. But to truly enforce its golden order on the Lands Between, the Greater Will needed to select a being known as an Empyrean to become its god on Earth, with an Empyrean being an individual whose body has the potential to become a vassal for an outer god, a being whose body can be used to carry out an outer god's will as a god on Earth, with the current Empyrean to have been chosen by the Greater Will to become its vassal being Queen Marika, which led her to become the literal vessel of the Elden Ring, housing it inside of her body and becoming a god on Earth of the Greater Will. However, due to an event we'll discuss shortly, Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring, breaking it apart into individual runes in an event that triggered a great war, remembered as the Shattering. A war where the demigod children of Queen Marika each took power by claiming shards of the Elden Ring for themselves, resulting in a war of such scale it left the Lands Between broken and blighted. with the player character then being called to the lands between sometime after the Shattering of the Elden Ring to defeat these demigods, collect their great runes, mend the Elden Ring, and take the title of Elden Lord. And it was this Shattering of the Elden Ring that caused the Empyrean Queen Marika to be imprisoned within the Erdtree, bound to live for eternity as a vessel for the Elden Ring and a vassal for the outer god known as the Greater Will within this magical tree. Which brings me to my first parallel with A Song of Ice and Fire, as it seems to me the role of an Empyrean sounds remarkably similar to the role of a Greenseer, particularly that of Bloodraven, who also seems to be a vassal for the old gods of the Weirwoods, potentially having been called north beyond the wall through dreams, just as Bran Stark was, to then be inhabited by the consciousness of a godlike being to carry out its will, while being bound to a tree through the Weirwood roots and given eternal life, in a seemingly perfect parallel to Queen Marika the Eternal, perhaps making the three-eyed crow that seems to have inhabited the Greenseer Bloodraven and now seeks to inhabit Bran Stark a parallel god to the Greater Will of the lands between, with both the three-eyed crow and the Greater Will searching for a potential candidate in a Greenseer or Empyrean to inhabit their body and represent their will on Earth, giving them eternal life while being bound within their respective magical trees. And if you're aware of my main theory within the A Song of Ice and Fire community, in which I've suggested there were ancient Stark Greenseers who, like Bloodraven, sat on thrones of Weirwood roots beneath the Winterfell Hearttree and were turned to stone to preserve their bodies so they could become eternal beings using the Weirwood, Queen Marika the Eternal becomes even more interesting. Because it just so happens this Greenseer parallel character, Queen Marika, who resides within a magical tree while given eternal life, also happens to have been turned to stone, becoming an eternally living statue within the Erdtree, just as I've suggested the ancient Stark Greenseers did, using their Hearttree at Winterfell. Check out my Grayscale Kings of Winter theory in the description below for more on this. And to further this connection between Greenseers and Empyreans, it seems that both Bloodraven and Queen Marika are also presented to us as having one singular eye, with Bloodraven missing an eye due to the Weirwood root growing through his eye socket, and Queen Marika seemingly missing one of her eyes due to the loss of half her face when we find her in the Erdtree at the end of Elden Ring, with both of these singular-eyed characters being a clear reference to the Norse god Odin, a mythological figure who George often draws on for inspiration, a god who sacrificed one eye for great knowledge and power, pinning himself to the mythological world tree of Norse myth known as Yggdrasil, so he could look down into the well beneath its roots and gain the knowledge of the runes, which is exactly what we see with the one-eyed Greenseer Bloodraven, who is pinned to the Weirwood by the roots growing through him, the one-eyed Empyrean Queen Marika being pinned to the Erdtree by a red spear, and the one-eyed Norse god Odin, who is pinned to Yggdrasil with a spear as well, only further connecting the Empyreans of Elden Ring and the Greenseers of A Song of Ice and Fire, and suggesting their inspiration from the mythological figure Odin. And if we look to the next Greenseer, Bran Stark, we find even more interesting parallels between these two respective magical beings, and more inspiration drawn from Odin. Because it seems another aspect of being chosen as an Empyrean in the lore of Elden Ring is to be granted a Shadowbound Wolf by the Greater Will as a vassal and protector. A wolf who is described as being a part of the Empyrean's very being, with these wolves being the very shadow of the Empyrean in a literal sense. With the one-eyed Queen Marika the Eternal being granted a Shadowbound Wolf named Malekith of the Black Blade, and another Empyrean in the story, Rani, who also has one eye and was granted a Shadowbound Wolf named Blaze, who acts as her vassal and protector as well, sounding remarkably like the Empyrean parallel character Bran Stark, who has seemingly been chosen by the three-eyed crow to become its vassal, has one eye open when he closes his normal two and opens his third, and has been granted an essentially Shadowbound Wolf in his Direwolf Summer, whom Bran uses as a vassal and protector as well, with these direwolves of the children of House Stark described as being a part of their very being as well, direwolves who are also constantly described as being shadows throughout the series, giving us yet another strong parallel between the Shadowbound Wolves who act as vassals for the Empyreans in Elden Ring, and the Spiritbound Wolves who act as vassals to the Wargs and Greenseers of House Stark as well. And it's highly likely that George and Miyazaki were once again drawing on Odin for the idea of these Shadowbound Wolves, with Odin being well renowned for having two wolves named Geri and Freki as his vassals and companions as well. Once again telling us that George was drawing on Odin for the one-eyed magical tree-bound beings with Shadowbound Wolves in both Elden Ring and A Song of Ice and Fire yet again. Now, as we return to the story of Elden Ring, we need to discuss why Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring in the first place, the event that caused her to be imprisoned within the Erdtree. You see, during the Erdtree's Age of Plenty, Queen Marika took a consort in Godfrey I, Elden Lord, having 3 children with him named Godwyn the Golden, Morgott, and Mohg, with these children growing to become the first demigods of the Land Between, a line which became known as the Golden Lineage. However, at some point, a fragment of the Rune of Death was stolen and infused within a knife that could be used to kill a demigod. And on a night remembered as the Night of Black Knives, a group known as the Black Knife Assassins killed Marika's firstborn child, Godwyn the Golden, using this knife imbued with the fragment of the Rune of Death, killing him in soul alone, leaving his body in a state of undeath, which in grief led Queen Marika to shatter the Elden Ring and remove the Rune of Destined Death completely, therefore removing the concept of death in the Lands Between after experiencing the death of her firstborn son, creating the new laws of reality known as the Golden Order, laws which halted the natural cycle of life and death, leading Queen Marika to become known as Queen Marika the Eternal, becoming imprisoned within the Erdtree. And it seems as though the Erdtree then replaced the process of life and death in the Lands Between, with the roots of the Erdtree receiving the souls of the dead back into the tree so they can potentially be reborn again from the Erdtree itself. Check out Tarnished Archaeologist's amazing video on Erdtree births in the description for more on this excellent theory. Essentially using the Erdtree to replace the cycle of life and death in the Lands Between by enforcing its new laws of reality, a law which came to be known as the Golden Order, an order of immortality and resurrection, something which is supported by the fact that the spirits of the demigods we defeat throughout the game are hewn into the Erdtree upon their death. In fact, there even exists an important death ritual in the Lands Between, in which the bodies of the dead are given to the roots of the Erdtree in what is referred to as an Erdtree burial, something we'll discuss later when we compare the Erdtree catacombs in which this process takes place to the crypts of Winterfell. And it just so happens we find this same concept of the spirits of the dead returning to the tree and bodies being given to the roots beneath the earth when we look to the Weirwoods of A Song of Ice and Fire as well, as we hear that when the children of the forest die, their spirits pass back into the trees as well, becoming a part of a collective consciousness within the Weirwoods whose memories store the history of the world. And just as we find in the roots of the Erdtree, it seems the bodies of the children of the forest are given to the roots of the Weirwood as well, with Bran witnessing a chamber full of singers who have been given to the roots deep within Bloodraven's cave. And just as the idea of being born again from the Erdtree has been speculated within the Elden Ring community, I've also theorised throughout my Stone Kings of Winter series that people can also be reborn from the roots of the Weirwood as well, with their spirits residing within the Weirwoods while their body is given to the roots, so these heroes can be reborn again thousands of years in the future. And it seems this idea of both the Erdtree and the Weirwood playing a part in this process of life, death and resurrection is once again rooted in real-world mythology. You see, throughout human history and myth, the symbol of the tree has been used to represent the life and death cycle that occurs in nature, with trees absorbing the nutrients of the dead that have decomposed into the soil and become fertilizer for the tree, with the roots converting the nutrients of the dead into new life, be it new growth, a dense canopy for shade, or ripe fruit for sustenance, allowing the tree to literally process the dead into new life. Trees have also been associated with rebirth and resurrection due to the natural cycle of nature that ancient humans witnessed with the passing of the seasons, with trees being alive and plentiful during spring, before losing its leaves in autumn and appearing to have died during winter, before being symbolically reborn with the onset of spring once more, leading ancient real-world people to associate trees with life, death, and resurrection. And it's this seemingly magical ability of the trees that would give rise to the mythological concept of the world tree, with the most famous example of this being Yggdrasil, a magical tree that connects the realms of the dead below with the realms of the living above in Norse mythology. Something I think George RR Matin and Hidetaka Miyazaki have collectively drawn on for the concept of the life and death cycle of the Erdtree and the Weirwoods, respectively. We also find an interesting parallel between the Weirwoods and the Erdtree when we look to the sacred grove of Weirwoods on the Isle of Faces in A Song of Ice and Fire, a sacred island full of ancient weirwoods said to be guarded by the Order of Green Men, an order which seems to have been formed around the breaking of the Arm of Dawn and the calling of the Hammer of the Waters, with these mysterious figures known as Green Men, rumoured to have green skin, green hair, and said to have antlers or branches growing from their heads, painting the members of this order of warriors assigned with protecting these magical trees as being anthropomorphized tree warriors, which once again lines up perfectly with the lore of Elden Ring, in which we also find anthropomorphized tree warriors known as the Erdtree avatars, who, as we discover from the item description of their ceremonial staff, arose as guardians of the minor Erdtrees after the Shattering, determined to protect the minor Erdtrees, with these tree warriors awaiting the player at the base of the minor Erdtrees, determined to defend these magical trees from any threat that may befall them, giving us anthropomorphized tree warriors tasked with protecting their magical trees in both series, with one arising after the shattering of the Elden Ring by Marika's hammer, and the other arising after the shattering of the Arm of Dawn by the Hammer of the Waters. And when we look further into the Erdtree avatars and their suggested role in the lands between, we find even more suggestive parallels. You see, there exists another group of beings in Elden Ring known as warrior jars, who are literally living jars, and it's said these anthropomorphic jars walk the lands between, gathering the bloody remains of great warriors inside them. And it seems as though once these living jars are full, they make their way to the base of the minor Erdtrees, filled with these bloody corpses. And it's highly suggested that the Erdtree avatars we discussed use their ceremonial staffs to smash these jars full of bloody remains at the base of the minor Erdtrees, in turn watering the roots of this magical tree with the blood of great warriors. Hence why we find the shattered remains of a great number of living jars scattered at the feet of the minor Erdtrees, which once again reminds us of the Weirwoods, being magical trees which seemingly require blood as well, with the worshippers of the old gods carrying out ritual blood sacrifice in front of Weirwoods to seemingly water their trees with blood too, just as we hear occurring with the jars full of bloody remains watering the roots of the minor Erdtrees. In fact, this isn't the only suggestion of magical trees in Elden Ring being watered with blood, as we hear of another Empyrean within the story known as Miquella, another son of Marika, who was attempting to grow his own Erdtree, which became known as the Halig tree. And he did so by watering a sapling with his own blood, in the hope that he could grow himself a magical tree that just so happens to have red leaves. Which sounds very much like what we see in A Song of Ice and Fire after Bran Stark learns to become a Greenseer, seemingly progressing backwards through time vision by vision to what seems to be the origin of the Winterfell Heart Tree, where we witness a white-haired woman slitting a man's throat in front of the Winterfell Weirwood as a sapling, watering the young tree with blood in what seems to be the event that established this heart tree and woke its magical powers in the first place, giving us magical trees being established through the watering of a sapling with blood in both Elden Ring and A Song of Ice and Fire as well. And the reason Miquella was attempting to grow his own Erdtree is because he was cursed from birth with eternal youth, growing his Halig tree where he would cocoon himself within the roots of the tree to be reborn as an adult. Which leads me to yet another Empyrean Greenseer parallel, as when we visit the roots of the Halig tree, we find the place where Miquella's cocoon used to be before being stolen away. And rather symbolically, the roots of the tree he wished to be reborn from are in the shape of a woman, with the location of Miquella's cocoon being where the woman's womb would be, making this tree his symbolic mother that he wished to be reborn from. Which is interesting because we consistently see the Weirwoods symbolically referred to as the mothers of Greenseers as well within A Song of Ice and Fire, with Bran Stark being described as having the roots of his Weirwood throne cradling his limbs as a mother does a child while in Bloodraven's cave. In fact, we even see this same symbolic language around Bloodraven when we first encounter him beneath his Weirwood beyond the wall as well, describing the roots of his Weirwood throne as embracing his withered limbs as a mother does a child, just as we see with Bran, presenting the Weirwood roots as the symbolic mother of Greenseers, just as we've seen with the Haligtree roots being the symbolic mother of the Empyrean Mikola in Elden Ring, and possibly furthers my theory of ancient Greenseers being reborn from the symbolic womb of the Weirwood roots deep in the crypts of Winterfell, with these ancient Stark heroes being given a sort of Weirwood burial behind the sealed area at the bottom of the crypts, given to the roots of the magical tree above so they could be born again in the future from the roots of the tree, an idea which finds an excellent parallel in the Lands Between as well. You see, as we explore the Lands Between, we find several gates in cliffsides that lead us beneath the earth into areas referred to as Erdtree burial catacombs, seemingly sacred areas beneath the earth filled with the roots of the Erdtree, with these catacombs having a sealed chamber that we access at the end of the area, in which heroes are given what is referred to as an Erdtree burial, where their bodies are given to the roots of the Erdtree upon their deaths, sounding remarkably like the burial customs of House Stark, in which we find the ancient kings of winter given a seemingly important burial in a crypt beneath their ancient Weirwood as well. A burial in a similarly sealed area at the very bottom of the crypts, in which I'm suggesting these first Stark kings were given the Westerosi equivalent of an Erdtree burial, being seated on a throne of Weirwood so they could be reborn from the tree as stone guardians of the Winterfell crypts. And remarkably, while we explore these Erdtree burial catacombs, we actually find reanimated statues coming to life to defend these sacred sites. You see, when we enter the sealed chamber where the Erdtree burials take place, we encounter an animated stone guardian known as an Erdtree burial watchdog, an animated stone statue of a dog that guards these burial sites beneath the earth, which come to life in the catacombs beneath the Lands Between, bringing to mind the stone direwolves of the Kings of Winter in the Winterfell crypts, stone watchdogs who are repeatedly suggested as coming to life in this burial site beneath their ancient Weirwood, with Ned noting that the shifting shadows made the stone figures of the Kings of Winter and their stone watchdogs seem to stir as the living passed by, something he also witnesses in dreams, with Ned noting that these stone direwolves turn their great stone heads and snarled as he passes in his dream, and something Theon even imagines while down in the crypts as well, noting that the eyes of the stone direwolves followed them as they passed, giving us animated stone watchdogs within burial sites beneath magical trees in both A Song of Ice and Fire and Elden Ring as well. And I think both George and Miyazaki have drawn on myth yet again for inspiration for these dogs who guard the symbolic underworld of the Winterfell crypts and the Erdtree burial catacombs. And that myth would be the Greek myth of Cerberus, who is described as a three-headed dog who resides beneath the earth, can turn people to stone, and guards the underworld of Greek myth, ensuring that the living don't enter and the dead don't leave. And to seemingly confirm this source of inspiration, we actually find some of the Erdtree burial watchdogs as having three faces, in a very clear reference to the myth of Cerberus, the watchdog of the underworld and the guardian of the dead. So as you can see, there are clear parallels between the catacombs of Elden Ring, in which heroes are given a burial amongst the roots of the Erdtree, and the crypts of Winterfell, in which ancient Starks were given a burial beneath their Weirwood, a burial which I'm suggesting will allow them to be resurrected from their throne of Weirwood roots. And rather amazingly, we find this same idea within Elden Ring, as there happens to be an ancient hero that we've already discussed who was given an Erdtree burial, with several plans for his resurrection. You see, after the Night of the Black Knives, in which Godwyn the Golden's soul was killed, while his body remained in a state of undeath, he was then interred amongst the roots of the Erdtree beneath the earth, in what seems to be an Erdtree burial, giving Godwyn a new moniker of the Prince of Death. with the location of his burial amongst the roots being interestingly referred to in-game as the Prince of Death's throne. And what we discover as we progress through the game is that there are several people within the lands between who are trying to resurrect this ancient hero from his throne of Erdtree roots, which once again sounds remarkably similar to my theory within A Song of Ice and Fire, of the ancient Stark Greenseers who I think will be resurrected from their throne of Weirwood roots. And what's remarkable is that the methods being suggested to resurrect the ancient hero Godwyn the Golden from the roots of the Erdtree is that they also share a lot in common with A Song of Ice and Fire as well. You see, there exists another character in Elden Ring named Sofiia, who is what is known as a deathbed companion. And it seems what deathbed companions can do is draw a small amount of life essence from a living champion by laying with them. We see this after being held by Sofiia in the Round Table Hold, with our maximum health being reduced by a small amount from this contact, essentially showing Sofiia's ability to draw on the life essence of a person in small amounts through game mechanics, sounding very similar to what we see Melisandre doing in A Song of Ice and Fire, drawing forth the life essence of Stannis in small amounts, just as Sofiia does, to then give birth to shadows. And it's Sofiia's plan to use this collective life force to lay with Godwyn the Golden as his deathbed companion and resurrect this ancient hero we find tied to the roots of the Erdtree from his state of undeath. But it seems this isn't the only plot within Elden Ring to resurrect Godwyn the Golden from the roots of the Erdtree, as we find it suggested in-game that the Empyrean Miquella, who is Godwyn the Golden's half-brother, is also attempting to resurrect this ancient hero from the roots of the Erdtree as well. And we know this through a stranded soul we find in the lands between at Castle Sol, who says the following: "Lord Miquella, forgive me. The sun has not been swallowed. Our prayers were lacking. Your comrade remains soulless." Which is rather interesting, as this implies Miquella has been praying for an eclipse to occur to bring life to a person who was his comrade and whose body remains soulless, with this person most likely being Godwyn the Golden, being Miquella's half-brother through their mother Marika, and whose body was left undead but soulless after the Night of the Black Knives. And we see this idea of an eclipse resurrecting Godwyn the Golden furthered when we speak with another stranded soul at the Church of the Eclipse within Castle Sol, who says, "O great sun, frigid sun of Sol, surrender yourself to the eclipse, grant life to the soulless bones," further suggesting that we could see this ancient hero who was given an Erdtree burial, resurrected from his throne of roots beneath the earth with the onset of an eclipse. And the reason both George RR Matin and Hidetaka Miyazaki are drawing on the eclipse as the event that will resurrect this golden hero is because in several real-world myths and religions, the sun was seen as a god, giving life and light to the world, with an eclipse being seen as the death and resurrection of this sun god, with his light and life being stripped from the world while the moon covers the sun and plunges the world into darkness, before being symbolically reborn and resurrected as light returns to the world after the moon passes out of the sun's path. Which is interesting when we think about Godwyn's moniker being Godwyn the Golden, associating him with golden light and therefore the sun, making him a symbolic solar deity as well, a golden demigod who, just like real-world myth, we could see literally resurrected with the onset of an eclipse in Elden Ring. And if Miquella's goal was to cause this solar eclipse to grant life to the soulless bones of his half-brother, this makes perfect sense as to why Miquella's twin Melania, the Blade of Miquella, fought against another of the demigods, Starscourge Radahn, so fiercely. You see, we learn throughout the game that Starscourge Radahn had been using gravitational powers to hold the stars in place for some time, something we learn when we witness the stars begin to move again after we defeat General Radahn in-game, an event which has technically now set in motion the solar eclipse, something which was previously not possible while the cosmos was held in place. So perhaps Miquella sent his twin Melania to defeat General Radahn so the stars could once again move, and the solar eclipse that would resurrect his half-brother Godwyn the Golden would once again be possible. And the fact that beating General Radahn is a prerequisite to accessing the upcoming Shadow of the Erdtree DLC means it's highly likely that the stars need to be in motion for the events of the story, meaning we could see the child Empyrean Miquella resurrecting the ancient hero Godwyn the Golden from his throne of roots beneath the Erdtree in the upcoming DLC. Something which once again lines up with my theory within A Song of Ice and Fire, in which I've speculated the child Greenseer Bran Stark will resurrect the ancient Stone Kings of Winter from their throne of roots beneath their Weirwood, giving us such a strong parallel that it just might be we'll see an Eclipse when we find Bran Stark resurrecting the undead Kings of Winter from their Weirwood burial at the Battle for the Dawn. If you liked this video and you'd like to see more comparisons with Elden Ring, let me know some of the topics you'd like me to discuss or parallels you've noticed in the comments below. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.